David Brewster here with a new episode of 3 for All. This is 3 Pat Martino Concepts from 2003, and I introduced the concepts area of the 3 for All series back in November with the Mick Goodrick concepts lesson, and that was well received, after he passed away. And with Pat Martino, he actually passed away, November 1st of 2021, and I saw the news when that broke, and I thought, man, what a loss, and definitely an absolute legend of jazz guitar and music education, and his career started in 1959. He moved to New York when he was 15 and started playing clubs, in New York and New Jersey. He was temporarily one of Les Paul's roommates for a while, and that's when his career started. And then somewhere around 1980, he actually had an undiagnosed medical emergency, and he almost died from a near-fatal seizure. And they had to remove actually part of his brain during the surgery. Post-surgery, he had complete amnesia. He couldn't remember who he was or his music career. He couldn't even remember how to play guitar. So that was in 1980. And then he returned to his career in 1987. So 7 years later, he, successfully exited the surgery and dealt with the medical issues and literally relearned to play the guitar and relearned who he was. And that's such an inspiring, story of mankind or of human beings, just to notice like what he went through and the hurdles and everything in his life. It's very inspiring. So if you'd like to learn more about Pat's life and his career in music and everything I just explained and a lot more, I totally recommend his book, Here and Now, which I devoured this a few years ago when I read it. It's a great book, very inspiring and insightful. His early years and then the health scare years and the recovery years, great book. And the concepts in this episode were actually pulled from this book, also an old copy of Guitar Techniques magazine from 2003, going with Jimmy Page right there. And there was a Pat Martino masterclass lesson in that issue. There it is. And this is actually related to an excerpt from a Guitar Player magazine. That was from, I think it was like in 2004, a year later than Guitar Techniques. It was written by Jude Gold, for a guitar player. What's up, Jude? But Jude Gold put that together, and it was in the magazine in 2004. And the book, Here and Now, actually reprints that lesson. It's like back in the back here. But there's a little bit of that old guitar player lesson. So you can actually find the information where I pulled these concepts, either in Guitar Techniques, in Here and Now, or an old Guitar Player magazine. So just a heads up. So it doesn't really matter if you locate the Guitar Techniques magazine or the Guitar Player magazine, which that was the April 2004 issue with Satriani on the cover. I don't know why I couldn't remember that a minute ago. Either magazine or Pat's book, Here and Now, I would actually recommend the book. That way you can read about Pat's life and read the book, and then also have a convenient copy of the lesson in the back. But in that lesson, it goes really deep. And we're just going to look at one area of his lesson, because he was talking about augmented triads, diminished seventh chords, chromatic scales, and octave displacement, and a whole bunch of stuff. But we're just going to focus on one area. I'm going to share some of Pat's, concepts. And I'm also going to share some of the things that happened with me from working with his concepts. And I'm really just kind of buttering you up and steering you toward Pat's lesson. So if you like this episode, work on this stuff, and then dive into either the magazine or the book and go even deeper. But to get started here, we're going to basically locate the diminished seventh chord. And I know this is really confusing for a lot of people. It confused me for a long time. And we're just going to slowly mutate a series of chords and then locate diminished seventh. So if we start right here, we can play, an E minor 7 right there in open position. So there's E minor 7, 1 flat 3, 5, flat 7. And then if we lower the fifth, that's going to change that to an E minor 7, flat 5. 1 flat 3, flat 5, flat 7. And if we take the 7, which is D, and we lower that a half step, now we're playing a double flat 7, and D flat is that note. And lo and behold, there's E diminished 7th. So a 1 flat 3, flat 5, double flat 7. So once again, there was E minor 7, E minor 7, flat 5, and then E diminished 7. So if we look at the notes we're using there, we've got E, G, B flat, D flat, and then E E again. And that's going to spell that diminished seventh chord. And if you look at the notes right there, there's E, B flat, D flat, and G. You know, the four notes we're holding down. And this is pretty, widely known, but if you take diminished seventh and move it up a minor third, you're playing diminished seven again. And it's the exact same four notes, just in a different order, because now there's G, D flat, E, B flat. And if you do it again, move it up another minor third, there's B flat, E, G, and D flat. Do it again, there's D flat, G, B flat, E. And if you move it up one more time, we're basically an octave higher than where we started. And that's basically this really interesting, pattern or series of every 3 frets or a minor third, you have another diminished seventh chord. And to kind of help you really see what we're talking about, I made this little animated video here, and it's color-coded. So I color-coded those 4 notes, and what I want you to do is watch this, and just watch as it gradually moves, but then also notice what's changing. Those notes are rearranging in different orders, but it's still just the same 4-note series. That series of chords is what Pat basically referred to as diminished seventh clusters. And they're just chords, but he referred to them as clusters in this lesson. So there's cluster 1, 2, 3, 4, and then the repeat right there. And you just burn those into your brain. I'm going to share that image one more time and just play through those and really pay attention to what we're doing here. There's something really interesting happening here. So all of those chords could function as E diminished 7 if that's what you're declaring as the root. There's E diminished 7. There's E diminished 7. There's E diminished 7. And so on. But let's change that root note. Let's change it to one of the other notes in that chord. How about that D flat? Right? Now suddenly that's D flat diminished 7. B flat. Same thing. G. Right? Same thing. So depending on what you're calling the root, that will change that diminished seventh chord. It's a very strange, musical anomaly in music. And we could actually locate other diminished seventh shapes. There's that one. We could move it to the next set of strings, do it right here. Exact same chord. We could also do it again way up here. Exact same chord, same pitches, and everything. That's actually a good little exercise, just kind of moving from one diminished seven to the next. That's a workout right there. But we're going to lock on to that higher, D string to the high E string, fingering. But keep in mind, there are other fingerings for diminished seventh chords, of course. But remember that, depending on what we're calling the root, that's going to shift or influence that diminished seventh chord. Okay, so that was the first concept. Now we're entering the second concept, but we're still focused on the same material, diminished seventh, arpeggios and chords. So now what we're going to do, we uncovered, the chord, and we started moving, up the fretboard. Well, let's do that a different way. Let's do that on one string, because diminished, seventh and diminished tonalities are built on minor thirds, and this diminished seventh, chord is literally built on, minor thirds. So there's E to G, G to B flat to D flat, D flat to E, and you're back at, where you started. So there's that on the D string. Go to the next string and start on that B flat right there, which was part of the chord, and do that again. Right? And it's still the same scale. B flat, D flat, D flat to E, E to G, G to B flat. And then move to the next string. So there's that D flat to E, E to G, G to B flat, B flat to D flat. Do it again. G, B flat, D flat, D flat, D flat to E. And you can kind of see, and if you just notice what we did right there, you can kind of see that lower chord right there. And then if you look at what your pinky does right there, there's that next shape right there. So we're literally connecting the fretboard, you know, using diminished seventh chords and arpeggios. So that's eye-opening. It's really important to see that. And once again, to kind of help you really visualize what's happening. Here's another animated video. But pay attention, you know, and really notice like what's happening as we move string to string. Notice the color-coded notes and everything. So before we move ahead with the second concept, it's really important to understand what we've looked at so far, because this blew my mind when I saw it. And this, once again, this is just one area of his lesson, and I'm keeping myself from going into the deep part of his lesson. I'm still in the kiddie pool, like in the shallow end right now. But what we're going to do is take this E diminished 7, and we're going to, you know, analyze and look at the notes. But in his lesson, he's basically talking about how using that diminished 7th chord, it can help you find other chords just by moving one note. So, you know, we have D flat right there, which is the double flat 7, right? Well, let's change that D flat to C, all right? And when we do that in all of these shapes that we just uncovered, that's actually part of C7, because here's E diminished 7. Move that D flat to C, keep everything else the same, and there's a little part of C7 right there, right? From E diminished 7 to C7 right there. Move up here, do it again. Alright, so we're moving D flat to C. There's D flat right there with your third finger. Move that down a half step, and there's C7 right there, like C7 over G. Right here. Alright, D flat's the note with your pinky now. Move that down a half step, there's a little piece of C7 right there, C7 over B flat. Up again right there. Now your index finger is holding that D flat. Move that back a half step. There's C, and lo and behold, there's C7. Root position. And you go up again. That's basically back where we started. You know, finding E diminished 7 and changing it to C7. Now the interesting thing here, like I said, this is really cool. That happens with any of those notes, not just the C. All right. Let's say we change the E note. Let's move that back a half step. Now suddenly that's E flat 7. Root position right there. Go up again, change E to E flat 7. No way. Go up again. E to E flat, there's E flat 7. E flat 7 over B flat, I guess. Do it again. And it just keeps happening over and over. Right? And that happens with any of those notes. And I want to kind of save space because we still have a lot left to look at in this episode. But trust me, depending on which note you target on that chord, move it down a half step and it changes to a 7th chord. All right, let's move into some arpeggio action with this. And when I think of diminished 7th arpeggios, I think of Randy Rhoads. And I can't help it. I'm a huge Van Halen and Randy Rhoads fan. But when I hear him or think about him, that's who I think of. And of course, Randy loved these shapes. And there's E diminished 7th played like that. But instead of doing it like that, we're going to kind of modify, you know, and get away from that idea. But before we do that, I want to make sure everybody knows this, because that is very famous, but some people out there may not actually know that shape. And we're just moving up like that. And here's an image kind of helping you see that on the fretboard. So what I'm basically targeting here, I'm basically relating the diminished 7th arpeggio to the chords or clusters that we saw earlier, you know, up here. And instead of playing it like this, we're going to do it like we did kind of in the beginning, like this. Because there's your E, G, B flat, D flat, and E. And that's E diminished 7. Right? But just like the the clusters when we move those up in minor thirds. We can do that with the arpeggio too, like this. And there I'm playing the same thing, just moving it up a minor third each time. And that's really eye-opening to see, you know, the chord and then translate it into an arpeggio. So if you want to expand that idea, you can actually start with the same thing. But when you get up to that higher E, grab that B flat, and then you're going to go up and basically play this. So it's a different shape. It's kind of a mirror of the other shape, because we had this, you know, index pinky, middle, index pinky, and then we're shifting to B flat, and now we're doing index pinky, third index pinky. So it's kind of an extension of the first one, like that. And that actually happens all the way up. Really cool to kind of see that just expanded all the way up the fretboard. Okay, here's a bonus concept from some of Pat's material. And near the end of his lesson, he starts talking about branching out and stretching out. And that part of the lesson's really crazy. But I was working through it, and I remember I came up with this kind of stretching diminished seventh chord exercise. And it kind of reminds me, you know, loosely of like John Petrucci's Rock Discipline, where he was using chord forms, you know, kind of stretch and warm up. But instead of using those jazzy shapes that he was using, we're using, you know, diminished seventh chords. So the first shape's right here, and we're actually using all of your fret hand fingers. I mean, you don't want to bear down really hard, but I am using like a fair amount of pressure there just to kind of really wake up my hand. So there's 4 fretted notes and, you know, 2 open strings, but like this. So E diminished seventh, like that. And you can strum it or pick through it, you know, whatever you want to do. Or just strum it. Or you just pick straight up and down, keep it real simple. But take that, move it up basically a minor third, and there's another shape right there, E diminished 7. Same fingering, just a different arrangement of notes. Take that, move it up another minor third, there it is again. Move it up again, right there. And then move it up again, you're an octave higher where we started. But I love working on stuff like that, where it's really unusual. That's not a common, you know, chord fingering for sure. You're not going to run across that very often. But it's demanding on the fret hand, and that's just a good low impact, you know, way to warm up. Like maybe it's early in the morning, you're kind of waking your hand up, and do it with chords. You know, don't just immediately start shredding. Condition your hands. Good strength builder too. And you're just moving those shapes right up the fretboard, just like that. Alright, that's going to wrap this episode of 3 for All with 3 Pat Martino Concepts from 2003. And for those of you scratching your head thinking, hey, where are the licks? You know, yeah, licks are very important. I mean, I definitely learn licks all the time. They're invaluable. But a lick's a lick. And if it's a cool lick or a great lick, I mean, you might be able to turn that into a dozen or 2 dozen, you know, new ideas and just kind of morph or mutate, you know, the cool lick. But a concept, like a great concept, like some of the stuff that Pat was throwing around, a great concept can generate thousands or tens of thousands of ideas. It's like a water fountain, you know, and a lick's kind of like a squirt gun, you know, squirt, squirt, but a concept, that's like a waterfall or a fire hose or whatever. It's lots and lots of information, and it can generate lots and lots of stuff. So that's kind of why I targeted this, because yes, Pat Martino had millions of great licks, but he also had millions of great concepts too, so don't forget that. So anyway, leave some feedback and comments. Please subscribe to Night Lessons, and I'll be back before you know it with more content and material. And rest in peace, Pat Martino. Thank you.